We're going to talk innovation now, and would you please welcome to the stage Larry Marshall, who is the Chief Executive of the CSIRO and former Silicon Valley venture capitalist. Larry, could you please come up and join us? Mike Cannon-Brookes, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of software company Atlassian. Mike, welcome. And Annie Parker, who's the co-founder of muru-D, Telstra's digital startup accelerator program. Annie, welcome. Take a seat.
Thank you.
Good to have you all here. So, we've heard a bit this morning about Brand Australia. Let's talk positive to start with. Where are the opportunities in Australia for innovation? Where are our strengths, do you think? Who'd like to kick off?
Ladies first.
Annie.
Thanks, guys. Morning, everybody. For those of you who haven't necessarily got your ears tuned in, I am English. I do apologise. It's my second Ausiversary later this week, so I've been in the country for a couple of years now. And I think from what I've seen, so as just mentioned, I run Telstra's accelerator program here in Australia, and also we're just launching in Singapore as well, so we're starting to grow our footprint across the region. And one of the things that I've seen, bearing in mind 20-odd million people isn't necessarily the largest population, particularly given where I've come from Europe in terms of 60-odd million people in the UK crammed into a tiny little country. If I look at the volume of applications we get through muru-D and also the quality of those applications, it really does stand at a global level in terms of the volume and the quantity and the quality of that. And I thought that was quite interesting coming into the country because I thought that might be a little lower, but it really isn't. So there's a huge amount of opportunity there in terms of the quality of the entrepreneurs and the ideas that we have in the country. And I think the other thing that I see, and I mentioned we're just opening our doors in Singapore, I think the proximity to Southeast Asia and to growth markets like Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, right on our doorstep is a huge advantage and something that I think we should be doing an awful lot more to capitalise on.
Larry, what strengths should we be building on in Australia?
Actually, for me, it's the innovation dilemma. I don't think we understand what innovation is in Australia. I think we confuse invention with innovation. And it's reflected, I think, in the fact that we're 10th in the world for investment into the creation of technology, into science, which is about where we should be relative to our GDP. But we're 81st in the world for the efficiency with which we translate those amazing inventions into practice. And you can argue a lot about the metrics and the numbers and how the World Economic Forum calculates that. So forget that for a minute. Australia has invented 130 profound, game-changing inventions. Whose child had an ultrasound before birth? Yeah? Australian invention. Wi-Fi, Australian invention. There's 130 of those, but only one produced a great domestic Australian company. We have to do better. We have to do better than inventing amazing technology and letting the rest of the world commercialise it. We need to bring the value, the impact of those innovations back to our nation. The good news is we're great inventors. 130 profound, game-changing inventions is fantastic. Way more than you would think for a country of only 23 million people.
You were an inventor, weren't you?
I was.
Yeah. What did you invent?
The first miniature solid-state visible laser, which took about 20 years to figure out how to make that work, maybe more, but it was harder to figure out what to do with it. And the profound, the sort of epiphany of value creation was figuring out that the ophthalmic industry badly needed this innovation to cure blindness. But it's ironic, like all scientists, I came up with a great invention because I understood that it was really hard, no one could do it, and the challenge attracted me. But the real adventure was, who cares?
The implementation of it. Yeah. Okay, Mike, what do you think? We'll just stick with the
Larry,
strengths.
I thought we were starting positive.
Yeah, I'm trying to,
We are
to
positive.
start with.
We're
I know where we're
fabulous
going to go
inventors.
here, but
I mean, I agree with both of them. I think we have very talented people generating ideas on a constant basis. I do agree with Larry, we struggle to get them off the ground, but you know, if we're looking at the positives, in almost every industry we have very talented people.
So not just particular sectors, you think across the board? Yep.
I think across the board. I think
Okay.
we make great businesses when we can get them off the ground. We struggle to get them off the ground.
All right, so let's get to the struggle then. We're obviously heading. What is holding it back? I mean, let's take this apart. You know, if the ideas are there, if the energy is there, the things that we've heard in the previous session about, you know, the brand Australia, this kind of get out, have a go at things, what's getting in the way of those things becoming ours? I mean, people wouldn't even know that ultrasound was invented here. A lot of people wouldn't know Wi-Fi. You know, why
so I
don't
think
they?
one of the things that I see, and we've invested in 34 startups now in the last 2 years, the majority of those entrepreneurs are first-time entrepreneurs. And what you need for that is help. You need for people to contribute, for them to get involved as mentors, advisors, giving some coaching. And it only helps if those mentors, advisors, and coaches have kind of done it before. And that's where the sort of this gap sits in terms of if we assume that the million folks in the advanced network, or sorry, the million expats, Aussies overseas doing brilliant work, wouldn't it be great if we could tap into their knowledge so that they can contribute back to the next generation of entrepreneurs and help them be successful? And that's really what we try and do at muru-D, is to find those pockets of knowledge capital and connect the dots back to those entrepreneurs who need that help most.
Mike, you've been pretty scathing about our failure to position ourselves in terms of technology. Explain why you think that's happening and what we need to do about it.
Larry's got better stats and a whole iPad full of notes there. I should have come forward better prepared.
Well, why don't you two do a double act?
I've used my brain, mate. It's all still up there. Look, I think the biggest problem we have is...
Really?
Channel, it is, a little bit. It's buried. The biggest problem we have is volume of experience, right? And we're not solving that problem, right? So the simply put is we have a lot of inventors. I like that term. I'm going to steal that and continue to use it. A lot of people inventing things. To get the rocket off the ground or to get it out of the atmosphere or whatever, you know, maybe we can get it off the ground and we can't get it out of the atmosphere, right? We run out of oxygen and we don't have the tanks to keep going. Is the volume of experienced folk that then kind of join that mission and continue to push it forward. That's why people leave in the main, right? Is that, and I think that's sort of the problem of solving, you know, the question you asked Anne. The question you asked me, I suppose, is I think the big problem is that at a federal, state, local, every level, we don't fear the disruption that technology is going to bring to our economy. And that's quite simply, technology people are used to disruption. We just almost sort of expect it, like we're constantly turning our industry over. I think we don't quite understand the current technical wave that we're coming through. Everybody just dismisses, the tech guys are always saying that this time is going to be different, right? I think this time fundamentally is different. And if we don't get that, we risk just dropping down every 10th, 11th, 12th, whatever league table you have, right? If we're not producing some meaningful percentage of the world's technology as a producer, we're going to be a pure consumer, and that's not a good place for any economy to be in. Never has been.
Okay, but the question is how? And Larry, as CSIRO chief, I mean, this is a very interesting question for you. You know, how do you break through that barrier?
Yeah, in fact, and that is the only question, actually.
Seriously, he's got all the props.
It's all in here. Michael, I'll leave that for you in case you might ever do an innovative company.
Strategy for 2020, you got one for this year?
Part of the problem, well, everyone knows strategy is 2020 in hindsight, right? So part of the problem for science is we're so often a solution looking for a problem to solve. And that's the nature of science, because we go exploring. You know, Wi-Fi was invented from black holes, study of black holes. That solid-state semiconductor visible laser, invented by studying optical chaos. So not even directly connected to the market that they created. And by the way, these were multi-billion-dollar markets that didn't exist when the invention happened, and literally were enabled by the invention. And I think part of the challenge for us is to engage better with each other, collaboration with the lowest collaborating nation in the OECD, We compete viciously with each other in science. We don't collaborate, and that's got to change. CSIRO will change completely in that mantra in the next 5 years as part of this. We also don't collaborate well enough with business, and we've got to fix that as well. But really, it's what are the market forces that are going to shape our future between now and, say, 2020 or 2030? 3 billion more people on the face of the earth, a wealthy 1.5 billion more wealthy middle-class people in Asia, people who are more connected than ever before, who literally believe they are a market of one. They don't want to just be sold to or marketed at. They want their opinion considered on an individual basis, and they want products that are designed for them. Example. I think I have one in my bag here. Example. Whoops, here we go. Titanium heel bone, custom made with a SME called Anatomics. This saved a man's leg who had cancer, would have had the leg amputated. We're able to replicate the bone, 3D print it, and replace it, and save his leg. And it's quite a great example of the marriage between...
Not sure what to do with that.
If I can.
I don't know where he's gone now, the rest of him, but...
digital technology and the physical world, that connection and the customization that digital technology combined with hardware technology can enable. We will live longer as a result of these types of innovations. What are we going to do with those extra years of life? How do we make them more productive? Can we engineer foods? Was mentioned towards the end of the last panel. We have ways to engineer strains of food that have unique properties that are tailored to your DNA to make you healthier. If you have a DNA that's susceptible to diabetes or heart disease, we can engineer food that will mitigate that, minimize the chance of you having that. If you've tried Barley Max, and I recommend you do, it's already shown to dramatically reduce colorectal cancer, which is a big problem for most men in Australia. Great example of an engineered food product that directly impacts health.
But the question again is translating that to international success, to making that, an Australian success.
We have to back it ourselves. The trouble is, the reason I left Australia in '88 is you can't raise money here to fund disruptive innovation, or at least you couldn't then. I think it's changing, certainly changing in the digital space. But Mike was an amazing pioneer building Atlassian. No investor would back Mike. He's a first-time CEO. He didn't really know what he was doing. He kind of fumbled along, had a wonderful adventure, and built an amazingly successful... And to his credit, right, despite all of the pressures to go offshore to raise money and move the company, he fought the good fight and stayed here and built it right here in Sydney. And that's an amazing achievement. We need more of that.
You're trying to buy the Australian Technology Park.
No, I'm trying to save it. I'm not trying to buy
you're
it.
trying to save it, but get it bought. Yes.
I'm trying to
it bought.
It's a little bit of an exaggeration.
Yeah. But you know what I mean. You're trying to save the Australian Technology Park to turn it into a...
Of which Larry, by the way, is currently the biggest tenant, so probably wants it saved as well.
And you want to turn the technology park into, well, a technology park.
Yes.
Tell us why.
It's all about innovation. Look, I think, around the world we have a lot of good examples of governments getting it right now. My worry is we wait too long to get it right. And one of the pieces of almost all of those plans anywhere is some form of physical manifestation of the commitment of all the different levels of government to technology, often associated with universities, research organisations, high-tech companies, startups. It's all the sort of mix.
So like Shoreditch in
London, the Roosevelt Island, what they're doing in New York. They've, again, a whole bit of public land. They've gone, what are we going to do with this land? Well, here's an industry. And one of the things people don't realise about technology is it does benefit so much from co-location, and study after study after study has shown high density of technology companies creates interactions and collaborations and all these sorts of things. We've had the technology park for a while. It hasn't been a wonderful success. But the only reason we got involved in the first place is kind of going from one technology park to zero seemed completely the wrong direction for the country to go.
But it also is an interesting example because the competing bid for it is about residential accommodation and business accommodation, but it's not technology anymore.
No. This is the controversy about the whole thing, really. it's supposed to be protected as it's currently covenanted, or whatever the legal term is, to be for technology and research purposes. And what we're trying to do is protect that covenant through the sale process, basically.
But what then do you need apart from a site? I mean, having a site's great, but getting that investment, I mean, how do you generate that kind of investment? Annie, I'm interested in your thoughts about this too.
And what Mike's talking about in terms of having a focal point for everybody to just kind of, whether it's corporates, education, sort of whether it's universities, schools, whatever, if you create that focal point, you get the density that you need in order for great ideas and collaborations to come out of. And you need the whole ecosystem, though. One ATP is not going to fix the problem that we have in the country, but it's better than none. I completely agree with you. But beyond that, you do need to see other parts of the ecosystem getting involved. And obviously, Telstra investing in muru-D is a really good example of where a corporate can make a meaningful contribution towards the growth of the ecosystem, but doing it in a way that's sustainable for the ecosystem, not great financial outcome for Telstra, which oftentimes corporates have done in the past. I think the other part of that is if we can encourage other businesses to do the same just by showing people how we did it, that kind of, look, it's not a scary path, folks. It's actually a lot easier than you think, and you can all make a significant contribution. If you consider the amount of people we've got in this room today, I'm going to go, it's about 120 or so. Think of the knowledge capital that's sitting in this room right now. If you all went out of these doors and adopted a startup or an entrepreneur and gave your advice back to them, just think of the power of what that gives back. And if you look at any ecosystem globally, whether it's Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, Shoreditch in London, one of the reasons why they do so well is the power of people getting involved and paying it forward. And if we can encourage local governments, national governments, by the way, I've only just got my head around the federal and thingy nonsense that you have here. Look, there's so much that we can all do to contribute, but it starts with us.
I'm interested in asking you about the layers that need to be involved in this kind of shift, because I think that's where people get stuck. What's the role of government? What's the role of private investors? And what's the role of education? Because I'm very interested in your Code Club exercise. Can you explain a bit? Let's start with education, start with kids, primary school kids, and innovation. What are you doing around that space?
Code Club, for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's a non-profit organisation I started about a year ago, and it's to fix a significant issue that we see in our schools at the moment, which is that coding, computational thinking, is not part of the national curriculum. It's written in the new digital skills curriculum, but it's not being developed and actually implemented into schools. That is frightening. If you consider the amount of innovation and the speed of which everything is now being digitally mediated, and our kids do not understand how that works, and we're not teaching them it from a really early stage in school, I find that frightening. Equally, if you look on it on the other angle, it's also a ridiculous waste of not giving children the skills that they need for the economy they're going to join in high-income jobs, in jobs that actually give them the ability to go overseas, to work abroad, to come back to Australia with those great skills to then develop their own businesses. So we launched about a year ago. It's a completely free operation where we go in and train teachers on how to teach coding, because it's not just about the kids, it's also about giving the teachers the skills to teach the damn thing in the first place. We now have 180 code clubs up and running across the country. We've trained nearly 300 teachers, and we've got 5,000 kids learning to code as a result.
Interesting.
And wouldn't it be great if we could actually put that into the national curriculum so that every child does understand the basics of how computers work? Because what we've found, certainly through just the 1 year alone, we're getting more girls starting to code. By the way, they're better at it than the boys, just saying. We're getting more girls coding. We're getting more kids saying, I never thought of computational stuff before. I thought it was for geeks and for rocket scientists. And now I realize that actually I can do this. And not only that, it teaches them problem solving, collaboration skills. It unlocks different sources of creativity as well. So for me, I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to change in education here.
What about the role of government? I know this is a kind of huge topic that we could spend a lot of time on. But
well, I could start with education, right? I mean, that's where they should be changing long term. I mean, we've been personally told from the top of the land that computer science teaching to kids is ridiculous, that maths and English is enough, and I was just like blown away. Especially if you look at these other countries talking about it. I mean, England now has mandatory, some form of, it's called computer science, but it's not like a kindergarten kid's really sitting there and writing, you know, university level computer science, but they have mandatory K through 12 computer science education, right? And that the impact of that hasn't been seen on our country. 10 years' time when they're churning out tens of thousands of kids who've done this and then want to do more technical careers, and that flows through the workforce, and we have no one flowing through in that direction, we're going to be in big trouble, right? So I think the very first thing the government should do for the long term is around education.
And then?
For the short term, I think it's got to be around the importing of talent. I think we have a huge experience gap. The way I say it is we have very talented people in Australia, very smart, well-educated, great university system, great inventors, etc. What we don't have is volumes of experience, right? Try to find people who've worked in the technology industry for 10, 20 years. They just simply don't exist, right? People who've run large technology companies, people who have worked in large technology companies in a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon or whoever, right? They don't exist here. And so we have to, in the short term, I think we have no option but to bring them in en masse, right? Find ways to get them in, fix their cost of living. There's a whole bunch of problems with that, and realise that they're going to come in and train all the Australians around them to I don't know, divulge those skills into the people around them who are just as talented. They just haven't had the right experience.
Okay, let's take some questions on innovation. Who has a question they'd like to ask? Yes, hands up over here.
I was interested in the comments from Larry and Mike about science being a corpus of creating things and then trying to work out who needs them, as opposed to a strategic partnership with key industries, health, education, etc., and then really understand the problems they're trying to solve and tackle it from that way. That's been an approach that's growing in Canada, and I wanted to hear your thoughts about what is Australia doing to create strategic interdisciplinary teams to start from the core to solve a problem?
Yeah, so that is the core of the problem, but there's two sides to it. Scientists will always invent in that way, and the more you try to direct them and target their research, the less impactful the research will be, potentially. So you kind of got to do both. You've got to let professors play and follow their instincts, and you've also got to connect them to market problems and make them aware of them, but you can't force them to go after what they're interested in. It will just happen through evolution. So for us, it creates two interesting challenges or opportunities. One, we pump $9 billion a year into the front end to create technology, and we've been doing that for a long time. So there's a natural resource of invention out there in the 41 universities in this country, and CSIRO and DSTO and so on. So there's an opportunity to mine that, to go in with a different mindset, looking with understanding market problems and who cares, and trying to repurpose those technologies. And that's a huge recovery of potentially lost value. And then going forward, better direct the research, better connect business to research so they understand each other and they interact. I'll give you an example. So in the 50s, Australia saved Australia's greatest industry, wool, by figuring out how to make wool weavable. Wool was a useless material until those problems were solved. You couldn't pleat it, you couldn't make suits out of it, and it shrunk when you washed it. The same group that solved that problem and literally saved Australia's greatest industry recently produced electronic fabric. Now, this is not cloth with wires inside. This is a circuit, it's a USB circuit, complete, where the cloth itself, the fibres, are the conductors. You can wet it, you can fold it in half, it doesn't affect the electric circuit. Who cares? I care because they took a wool technology from the 50s and repositioned it to something that's really relevant today. Who potentially cares? Well, if you can put your phone in your pocket and it's made of this material that conducts electricity, you can charge your phone by your physical movement, so your phone never goes flat. And we've actually done that. So I think they're the two sides. Traditional innovation, the stuff that Mike and I are used to doing, is go find a problem and then go search for the solution, and it might involve technology, it might involve a modified business model, but that's not how scientists innovate, and we're missing out if we don't go back and mine those innovations and realise their value.
But someone's pointed out, in the questions I'm receiving here, that we're great at investing in invention, but the funds dry up really quickly when it comes to investing and bringing those inventions to market.
Yeah, there's a valley of death between the 9 billion on the front end, and by the way, we have 2 trillion on the back end. We're the 4th biggest funds management industry in the world. So 9 billion on the front end, 2 trillion on the back end, and very little in between to fund the translation of this into that. And that's a really missed opportunity. The good news is we're great inventors, we have the 9 billion on the front end, and if we can figure out how to cross that valley of death, there's a pot of gold at the end of that journey.
The valley of death.
Yeah, I disagree with that last point. I think far too many Australian entrepreneurs whinge about funding, to be honest. And I think the problem is that funding is a global source nowadays. Capital flows around the world. I don't believe funding is a problem in almost any sector of what we're doing. We have some bad entrepreneurs with bad ideas who can't get funding, and they shouldn't get funding, and that's the way it should be, and all they do is whinge about being unable to get funding. Not present company completely excluded, obviously. But the problem is, the reason I keep yammering on about experience is, like, if those ideas can't scale, that funders, the people with money who come in, won't invest in them because they'll realise the idea can't scale. So I don't think the problem is the amount of money we have or that the money is interested. I think there aren't good examples of people saying, well, I'm going to fund this, and look, it's scaled and it's grown and it's gone into a growth and scaling mode that's sustainable, and then more funding comes in. If there was 4 or 5 of those, then I guarantee the super guys would be like, geez, let's pile it all in there. But without the experience and the talent, what happens is your 4 or 5 person, idea, invention, whatever, goes overseas because of the experience that'll get it over the line, not the funds that are available, right? We have tons of examples of funds coming from all over the world to here. And capital is the ultimate, it doesn't care.
Someone else has said the biggest thing we need to help entrepreneurs with is helping them level up in engaging with and then winning new customers. Any of you want to comment on that, about the relationship between entrepreneurs and customers?
Look, you always have to focus on your customer, of course. I think there are quicker ways of doing it, or by having the right people involved, you can actually fast-track that process, and it's something that we focus on and help the guys out at muru-D is helping them find who could be, not necessarily volume of customers sometimes, particularly if you're an enterprise startup. What you actually need is the right first customer to help figure out the product market fit, help you figure out what are all of those barriers or issues with your first line of product that just need fixing. And it's those right first customers, I think, that are massively important, not necessarily volume.
Okay, more questions for our panel. Yes, up here.
This one, I guess, is probably most relevant for Mike, but I just wanted to get your opinion. Basically, me and my good friend here, Peter, have just opened up our first kind of private business club that's designed to get established business leaders like all of yourselves and first-time entrepreneurs like us in the same room together, sharing knowledge, sharing advice and learning from each other. I was wondering, is that something that would have been a benefit to you when you were at that stage of your career?
Potentially. I mean, we tapped plenty of experienced folk to try to extract their ideas and stuff. I think that's always, any form of mentoring relationship is there. I think what people miss is those are, commercial is the wrong word, but they're, in any relationship, negotiation, deal making, what's in it for the mentor is as important as what's in it for the mentee. And too many of these things are all about, well, let's get all these smart people to just sort of donate their time and energy for free for nothing in return. And it doesn't have to be money that comes back in return, right? Like a lot of the businesses, for example, I personally help out or invest in are because they're in an interesting space or trying to solve an interesting problem that I actually don't know anything about, right? So for me, the equation is always, can I bring some experience to help person X, company X, and can I extract something at the same time, learn about manufacturing or learn about things that I have nothing to do with, right, on a daily basis, finance, security, whatever it is. And so I think as long as you set up those relationships to make sense to everybody, then that, mentoring or any sort of is very valuable. But I wouldn't expect all of these 120 smart people to just kind of give of their time for free. But it doesn't have to be a financial outcome, I think, is what the entrepreneur has to be really clever about is find what that particular person is interested in or is passionate about, and work out a way to get them involved to get more of that.
Larry, what did you want to say?
Jenny, I just want to go back to your earlier question, and I have something else in my bag here. CSIRO for years has run a thing called STEM in schools, or scientists in schools. We do thousands of school visits during the year where we try to connect kids and inspire kids to pursue science. And in Science Week, a couple of weeks ago, we got 40 members of Parliament to come with us. We got 60 companies in it. I'd like to ask all of you if you're willing to volunteer for that, because in that week we did about 300 schools. But what I'd like to do, with the help of more companies volunteering people, more universities volunteering people, is do every school in the nation next year to kick off Science Week to address the problem that you raised. I mean, teachers don't know how to code the robotic Lego that they use. We teach them how to do that, as does Telstra. We could really use your help. Why? When I was a kid, I was inspired to pursue a career in science when I saw this on a black and white TV sitting on the floor of my assembly hall at school. And if that's not clear enough, it's basically this. Now, I showed this to the kids during Science Week, and I asked them, who brought those images to Earth? Let me ask you, who brought those images to Earth?
That'd be us.
Thank you. The kids don't know that. The kids feel small, they feel far away from the world, and they feel irrelevant. And they're not. When we look up into the night sky in this country, we see the centre of the galaxy. You can't do that from anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. So in my lifetime, inspired to do science, seeing Armstrong walk on the moon, I then woke up a few months ago to see this. These are the first images of Pluto. Pluto, our outermost planet, or dwarf planet. In my lifetime, we've gone from the moon to Pluto. Ask the kids, who brought these images back? Do you know? Same facility, Tintinbilla, Australia. In any given day, Australia manages all of NASA's deep space assets for about half the day. It's a 50-year relationship. You tell kids that, and suddenly they don't feel so insignificant. Suddenly start to feel more like they're at the centre of the action, and they might start to believe that they have the power within them to invent a better future for us. That's what we need them to feel. That's what we need them to do.
Little round of applause all around there, I think.
Okay, great note to end on. We have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us today. Would you please thank Larry Marshall, Mike Cannon-Brookes and Annie Parker. Thank you.
Thank you.